Hello, this is Piero Giorgio, author of Survive the Economic Collapse. I've been interviewing a few people for my next project, which is a book on self-defense, and I've had the privilege to interview Mr. Massad Ayoob. Now, for those of you who know him, and he's very famous, there's no introduction needed. But for those of you who don't know him, Massad Ayoob is one of the best and well-known international firearms and self-defense instructors. He has been teaching the police and civilians, and he has been leading a lot of and running companies for teaching self-defense. And recently, now directs the Massad Ayoob group, and he's also an expert witness at trials about self-defense, gun use, and how things happen in the context of self-defense. He has been writing many articles in very well-known magazines in the United States, like American Handgunner, Gun Week, Guns and Ammo, Combat Handgun, and many others. He has wrote many very interesting books. Perhaps the well-known is In the Gravest Extreme, The Role of the Firearm in Personal Protection, and certainly one that I recently read, which is his latest one, Deadly Force, Understanding Your Right to Self-Defense. I will put descriptions below under the video of my interview of Massad Ayoob. Now, this interview was not supposed to be recorded for sharing. However, because information not shared is lost, I thought that it would be interesting to put it online, and you will find it, of course, in my book, with some little changes on the text slightly to make it fit the format for publishing. But here it is. Enjoy it and take care. First questions I want to have your opinion on is where do you see the laws about gun ownership and self-defense going in the United States? It's something always changing, and I wanted to have your opinion on that.
Well, basically, there are two different things. The laws of self-defense, among the most mature bodies of law that we have, and there's very little that's changed with them over the decades. The laws on gun possession and concealed carry are changing so constantly. I tell my students anytime they cross a state line to check the website handgunlaw.us. A good example is a week ago, the state of Virginia, the Attorney General unilaterally declared they would no longer recognize the permits from 25 of the 49 other states.
I see.
For concealed carry.
And is the trend something that gives people more freedom in that sense, or do you think it's the opposite?
By and large, yes. The Virginia thing is a step backward, but the majority of the states we're seeing more and more latitude for concealed carry. State of Florida alone now has over 1 million carry permits out.
Mm-hmm.
So, by and large, it's working out well.
Okay, well that's good news. Now, anti-gun lobbying, let's say, they tend to be very much represented in the news, and of course, when you watch news on television and so on, they tend to lobby very strongly and give a lot of data, or at least they claim to say data, to try to ban as much as possible guns. And when I read your books and I look at the different websites, it seems that there's overwhelming data to the opposite, that gun ownership and concealed carry diminishes problems. Is that what you see in the U.S.?
Basically, what we're finding is incident by incident, the person who is armed is much less likely to become a murder victim or a rape victim than the person who was not armed.
Mm-hmm.
The recent trend of the anti-gunners to stop talking about gun control per se and start talking about gun violence, it allows them to any death by firearm. A couple of years ago, when Bloomberg started his Every Town for Gun Safety campaign, they were reading off lists of victims killed by gun violence. The list included criminals killed by police in gunfights. The list included one of the Boston terrorists who was killed in a shootout with police. And the list included everyone who committed suicide with a firearm. And right around 50% of firearms deaths in the United States are suicides. Which leads us into the wholly separate area of individual determination of end-of-life issues. If you take those out, what you generally have is a whole lot of criminals killing other criminals in turf wars over drugs or personal feuds. Many of the groups like Bloomberg's, a man 21 years old who kills another dope dealer to protect his turf, is listed as a child killed by guns.
I see. Well, it's crazy, but I understand how they play on that things. Now, when citizens in the US want to, you have a lot of training and courses. I've seen on your website. You have a long curriculum of courses that you provide. What can citizen, lawful citizens and residents do to learn and train about lawful self-defense in the US?
Well, essentially, it's pretty basic. The National Rifle Association has classes taught all over the country by thousands of their instructors. Essentially, the standard in the United States is you can use deadly force in a situation of immediate, otherwise unavoidable danger of death or great bodily harm to oneself or other innocent parties. That in turn is generally determined by the simultaneous presence of three criteria. Now, different instructors will use different terms for those criteria. The terms I use, the longest established terminology, is ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. Ability means your attacker has the power to kill a cripple. He's got a gun, he's got a knife, he's trying to run you over with a car. Or it can also be disparity of force. He doesn't have a weapon per se, but he weighs 300 pounds and you weigh 120 and he's violently attacking you. Very often males attacking females are seen as possessing disparity of force. And it means in essence that even though he doesn't have a weapon, within what our courts call the totality of the circumstances, if his attack continues, it's so likely. Are you still there?
Yep.
Yeah. If his attack continues, it's so likely to kill or cripple you that it becomes the deadly weapon, and it warrants you drawing a gun and shooting it to protect yourself or the other party. The opportunity factor means he is capable of immediately employing the power. The example I use is you've got a guy 100 yards away or 100 meters away waving a machete and threatening to decapitate you. He's certainly armed, but he's not capable of immediately carrying out his threat until he gets much closer. The same man coming at you from, say, 7 paces, the opportunity factor is absolutely met. The third element is the jeopardy factor, which means essentially it goes to manifest intent. He's manifesting or showing by words and or actions that he obviously intends to kill or cripple you. And the entire thing is seen through the lens of the English common law doctrine we use here, the doctrine of the reasonable person. That's basically a 3-pronged test that asks, what would a reasonable, prudent person have done in the exact same situation, knowing what you, the person who pulled the trigger, knew at the time you pulled that trigger.
I see. It seems very reasonable. is it within that doctrine that the Castle and the I think you call that Castle doctrine in English law, English and American law. That
the Counsel doctrine speaks to defense of home.
Mm-hmm.
Someone attacking you in your home.
Okay.
And it means simply, in the wording of the English common law, the individual's home is their castle, and attacked there by an intruder, they need not retreat before they use appropriate force in self-defense.
I see. Now, one of the things I found very fascinating in your books, especially in the last I read, which is Deadly Force, is that there's a lot of things that happen after you go through the unfortunate event of having to use self-defense. What's the basic things that citizens or that are in this situation must think and do once it happens, not to be caught by loopholes in the law or just the way the law is made?
The key thing is to immediately report it to the police. Our emergency code here, as you probably know, is 911.
Mm-hmm.
Be the first one to call it in. You are logged as the victim complainant.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen again and again here, most of our defensive gun usages, no shots are fired at all. The bad guy attacks his intended rape victim, she pulls a gun, he runs away, and nobody's hurt. If she does not call it in, he gets around that corner, ditches his knife, calls in and says, a crazy woman pulled a gun on me, she said she was going to murder me, here's a description, here's the license plate of the car I saw her drive away in.
Mm-hmm.
He has become the victim complainant, and she, the original victim, has now become the suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And our system, like most systems, including I suspect yours, is geared on the assumption that the complainant, the person making the initial contact with the authorities, is the victim.
Yes.
And the person they're complaining about is the suspect. And it becomes an uphill fight from there to, it's just literally an identity reversal, a role reversal. That's why we tell them, you don't just walk away, this is not television, you have got to call this thing in immediately.
Mm-hmm. And once you report, and eventually police comes to investigate and check the material facts that there is on the scene, what is the behavior that one should have, or the important steps that one should do with the police?
Well, I still recommend the 5-point checklist that I gave in the book.
Mm-hmm.
When the officers get there, explain what happened that led to you drawing your gun. This man attacked me, this man attacked my wife, whatever it was. You're confirming once again you were the intended victim, the good guy. He was the perpetrator, the bad guy.
Yeah.
Second, I suggest I make a statement to the effect that if necessary, I will sign a complaint against this person. They're speaking the officer's language, and it confirms, okay, I'm dealing with a victim, and the other guy is the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
I tell them, point out any evidence. If the man dropped a weapon, point it out before somebody picks it up and it disappears. If shots were fired, point out any spent casings or anything that you're aware of, anything at all of that nature. Evidence tends to disappear at shooting scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth, I tell them to point out any witnesses. In every society, a whole lot of people don't want to have to lose a day testifying in court.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're afraid of criminal reprisal or something. And the testimony that could have saved you, if they walk away and are not identified, is going to disappear. And at that point, if an interrogation begins, I tell them that's the point at which you be very cooperative, but tell them you'll have my full cooperation after I've spoken with counsel.
Mm-hmm. So the
Too easy. There's something you say to be misread. One of the points that I always make with them is that the office, they're going to be in child mode to the parent. Okay, the authority figures, the parent psychologically, subconsciously, the person being questioned wants to satisfy them with an answer.
Yes.
The detective, your country or mine, is going to ask the questions as they occur to him. It creates the false illusion of you giving a narrative now that things happened in this sequence. And later, when you're asked, okay, tell me in detail what happened step by step, it's probably not going to be the same as the answers that you gave to the random questions. And it creates the false illusion that you've changed your story and things might have happened in a different sequence than they did.
Yeah. The majority of people know about the legal system through television and movies. How yeah, how the in here as well, and I know a lot of people in my country who think our legal system is the one from the United States because they watch American movies. And how does the training that you give, or the courses that you mentioned before, focus people on the reality? Do you see? I mean, what I mean is, do you see a lot of that discrepancy, this difference between what people think and what the reality is?
People see TV and they think they're going to shoot somebody and everybody's going to pat them on the back and, they'll ride off into the sunset. And in fact, in this country, it's generally treated as you have committed a crime. It's against the law to shoot people.
Mm-hmm.
We explain that what we're talking about here is what our law calls an affirmative defense. You're saying, yeah, I shot him, but I was correct in shooting him. And we tell them that even though the law doesn't explicitly say that, real-world trial dynamics means the burden of proof now just fell on you.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to show them that, yeah, you were right in doing what you did.
I see, of course. And when there is the investigation and eventually the trial, obviously you have counsel. So in that legal counsel, the first question is, how do we find the right lawyer, the right legal counsel that has experience in these kind of things, instead of finding just someone who doesn't? I mean, it can make a big difference, right?
Oh, absolutely. I recommend that they check around and find out in their community. Over here, most police will either have a union or they'll have a fraternal organization that represents their interests. And I tell them, go to those cops and ask them, what attorney are you guys going to hire if one of your officers is involved in a shooting? Now you've got a guy who you know has experience doing shooting trials, and it doesn't matter much in our law whether you were carrying the gun on a badge or on a concealed carry permit. The dynamics of the shooting trial, self-defense shooting, are going to be very much the same, cop and civilian.
Mm-hmm. I see. And what are the major do's and don'ts in court when that happens? Besides, obviously,
Well,
what the...
One of the major do's is everybody gets told never talk to the police. Now, that's why I give them that 5-point checklist at the
Mm-hmm.
scene. If you've got the dead bad guy's buddy has ditched his gun and he's screaming, that guy over there in the London fog overcoat shot my buddy for nothing, and you're saying, I ain't going to tell you nothing at all till my lawyer gets here, you've just done an imitation of every criminal that that investigating officer has ever arrested. They figure if you were justified, you would have said, bullshit, this guy attacked me, I shot him in self-defense, etc. And now again, you've got the uphill fight. Another big mistake is because most of our defense lawyers spend the great majority of their time defending guilty people, they tend to reflexively give an innocent man a guilty man's defense. And one element of that is telling them, ooh, you won't have to take the stand, they can't prove a thing.
Mm-hmm.
What we've got to do when the burden of proof shifts on us in the affirmative defense, when we have to show that, yeah, we shot him, but we were right to shoot him. If you don't tell them, what it's going to come down to is both sides stipulate. Both sides agree, yeah, you shot him. It's going to come down to why did you shoot him. The attorney can't explain that for you. The only person who can really explain that is you. We tell them, expect to take the witness stand if you go to trial.
Yep. Okay. The Now a lot of my readers are from what I think in the US is called the preppers. There's a lot of them believe, I think erroneously, that when there is a crisis or a time of natural disaster with criminality, there's no law anymore. And of course I tell them it's a mistake in my book and that we need to still think of the law. However, what do you think are the elements that make, in a disaster situation or when there's looting, or what is the best attitude to have in terms of self-defense or making sure your fellow neighbors and citizens are safe if you're maybe one of the few ones who can help them or defend them?
Well, basically, what you've got to bear in mind is, while the rule of law may have been suspended simply because there are no cops there to enforce it, does not mean that it's not still in effect. After it's all over, whatever you did during that crisis, you're going to be judged by the same standards you would have been judged if you shot somebody prior to it happening.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, in this country 10 years ago, Hurricane Katrina, there were a whole lot of self-defense shootings that took place during that disaster where there simply weren't enough cops to get to every place they were needed during the looting and the criminality that followed. At the same time, every single one of those shootings was investigated, and in some cases, political prosecutions came out of them,
Mm-hmm.
politically motivated prosecutions.
I see.
So it's not going to be a fantasy like, Walking Dead, it's the end of the world, we're starting over. At some point, society is going to restabilize.
Yes.
And anything that you did during that period, you are going to be going to trial for, or at least be answering to the authorities for.
Yeah, absolutely. In the current legal system, what would be if you could wish for some improvement to it, or if you would see a trend that you would like to see continue, what would it be?
I would like to see the public more educated in self-defense law. I've lived long enough to hear an attorney, a law school graduate, scream into a TV camera, "There's no such thing as a justifiable homicide." The general public, at least in this country, the United States is a very Judeo-Christian-based society. The majority of people still think the Sixth Commandment says, "Thou shalt not kill," when in fact in the original Hebrew it always said, "Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill with evil intent."
Exactly.
And there are a great many people in the public who simply can't wrap their head around the idea that it's okay to kill somebody to save your life, to save your child's life.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, for sure. And in the recent decades and years, for sure, there's been an increase, or at least that's a perception I have, of active shooters or terrorist attacks involving, terrorists shooting at people, whether it's in churches or public places, wherever. Now, what do you think is the right attitude for citizens to react to that?
Well, in my country at least, there are, essentially really in every country, there are three emergency services. There's emergency medical service, there's fire service, and there's police service. If you went back to mid-20th century, the only American home you'd ever find with a fire extinguisher in it would be a home that belonged to a professional firefighter. Today, any home that doesn't have fire extinguishers, you're seen as kind of careless and socially remiss, as if you had little kids in the house and were leaving open bottles of lye on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
In the mid-20th century in this country, if you went to your family doctor and said, "Doctor, teach me how to do closed-chest cardiac massage," which is what they call CPR back then, they would have looked at you and said, "What are you, nuts? If you want to learn that, go to medical school. That's what doctors are for." And today, for generations now, any adult American who doesn't know CPR and basic first aid is considered a little bit selfish and socially derelict.
Mm-hmm.
The defensive firearm is exactly the same thing. For decades now, I've taught the defensive firearm as a direct analog to a fire extinguisher. We have it for the same damn reason we understand first aid, that we know CPR, that we've got a tool right there in the kitchen that if something flares up on the stove, we can kill the flames before they involve the rest of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Simple math. I don't recall offhand the population of Switzerland. Our country right now is probably around 320 million people if you count immigrants.
Yep.
And we have less than 1 million cops. The general accepted number here is about 800,000 police officers. We have fewer paramedics than that, slightly more firefighters. But basically, we have that extinguisher because we know 1.4 million firefighters can't be right there to cover 320 million people. We know maybe probably even 500,000 paramedics can't be right there on your doorstep when somebody falls and breaks a leg or somebody has a heart attack and passes out on the floor. And the same exact thing is true when someone kicks down your door to invade your home. We don't have a cop to put on every doorstep. And if we did, it would be the KGB, and nobody wants that. So for us, I tell them that the gun is the direct parallel to your fire extinguisher. The day is going to come when I think every home has an automatic electronic defibrillator like mine does. And it's for the exact same reason that I put on a gun when I get up in the morning and take it off when I go to bed and still leave it where I can reach it. When the emergency strikes, it's going to be citizens, first responders, who have the best chance of stopping it. One of our authorities you might want to look up, Ron Borsch, B-O-R-S-C-H. He runs the SEAL Academy, S-E-A-L-E. It stands for Southeast Area Law Enforcement Academy in Bedford, Ohio. He's probably our leading authority now in collecting data on mass murders. And he has what he calls the clock of death, that once one of these things starts with one of these psychopathic killers, every few seconds another person is going to get shot. Average response time in this country is about 11 minutes. And sometimes it's faster. The recent San Bernardino thing, police were there in 4 minutes, which is an excellent response time. But just as we know how far a fire can spread in 4 minutes, how within 4 minutes somebody gets a lot closer to brain death if nobody's restarted their heart. How many people are going to die in those 4 minutes waiting for the first cop with a gun to get there to stop the killer? If somebody right there on the ground, what we call here ground zero, when it happens, can simply draw a pistol and shoot the son of a bitch, they're going to save a hell of a lot of lives. A good one for you to look up would be 2 incidents that occurred in the year 2012 in the same city, Aurora, Colorado. One you've undoubtedly heard about is the psycho who dressed up like the Joker and Batman, showed up at a theater with an AR-15, a couple of .40 calibers, and a bunch of ammunition, and appears to have deliberately selected the one theater in the area that was a gun-free zone, where his diary shows that he spent a considerable amount of time deciding what his target was going to be. And this was not the closest theater to him. This was not the theater that had the most victims. And he was the guy who said he wanted to set the record for a mass murder. It was the one that was posted, no guns. If you got a concealed carry permit, you can't be in this theater. And it guaranteed him a hunting preserve of innocent victims who couldn't fight back. That evil son of a bitch shot, if my memory serves, 72 people, killed about 12 of them. When at the first sight of an armed policeman, he laid down his weapon and surrendered. Now, the same city about 3 months before, I very much doubt you've heard of this one because most Americans haven't. Aurora, Colorado, would have been April of the same year. Do a Google search for the Chiaron Parker incident, C-H-I-A-R-R-O-N, last name Parker, P-A-R-K-E-R. Another psycho fills his pockets with bullets, takes a gun to a church, is apparently going to kill as many people as he can. He gets off one shot that kills one victim. Instantly, one of the other people in the church who's licensed to carry a gun drew a gun, killed him where he stood, and stopped the murders.
Yeah, of course.
Our media does not want to mention that because people protecting themselves with guns is not politically correct here.
Neither is he's here anymore. Now you've seen obviously the Paris terrorist attacks of late November, and the same in a room full of 1,500 people, not a single one was carrying a gun, and therefore a lot of them were killed. And what's interesting to compare United States with Europe is that even the government in the United States issues warnings or issues advice to people to say, in case of active shooters, of course you should run or hide, but also you should fight. And the French government came out with the same document, but basically they said, don't fight. Run or hide or call the police, but don't fight. And I found this completely absurd. I don't know, in your experience.
I would think any Swiss man would find that completely absurd.
Oh, of course.
Over here, we get open notice there was one country Adolf Hitler did not dare invade.
Yes, we try to keep that tradition, but rest of Europe is the complete opposite. And I was wondering, from your experience, if you see some major differences or major trends from Europe to the US. Of course, Switzerland is very much close to the US in that sense, but other countries, we mentioned France, but UK is a disaster. Crime is increasing very strongly since they banned handguns, for example, for most people. I don't know if you're familiar or if you have any comments on what's the trends in Europe for gun laws.
I haven't been over there in years. What I hear is that Germany, France, some of the Scandinavian countries, a whole lot more people are buying firearms for home defense. Tell me what you're seeing in Switzerland. Are you seeing more people carrying on the street?
Well, carry in Switzerland is not common, but owning guns and using them for self-defense in the home, it's very, very common, and a lot of people are buying now. Again, because obviously with all this mass migration happening, people are getting a bit scared, and there are more burglaries and rapes and things like that. So clearly, but the concealed carry is really difficult, even in Switzerland, unfortunately.
When I was there in the 1990s, they told me that in half the cantons, if I was legal to have the gun, I was legal to carry it loaded. And in the other half, I would need a canton entry permit to do so. Has that changed?
Well, the carrying unloaded is possible, because you can always say that you are going to the range, so it's very possible, and it's something that I do daily, and no one is really checking anyway. But certainly, no one is going to make a big fuss if you had a gun with you and you stopped an active shooter. I mean, you would go through the process of law just as the United States, but they would still consider that you were in self-defense here as well. And as far as having a gun not 100% legally on you, well, that's another. You may get a fine, but it's not a big crime, for sure. And that's part of my job, is to try to hear, because my readers are mostly European, to tell them how to responsibly, as a citizen or just as a human being, responsibly think of violence and force as something that can be lawful and right to defend yourself or other people against these crazy people. And because there are more and more of them, unfortunately, in this world. So we have to be responsible. But one of the reasons I ask you the question about the active shooter is because I've heard a growing number of people, it may not be proportion of the total, but I hear a lot of people who say, well, it's not my job to save others. I may defend myself, but stopping an active shooter to kill innocent people, innocent people I don't care anymore about. It's not my job, and I disagree with that. But is it also something that you hear sometimes?
Well, I hear it a lot, and while they do not have a duty to do so, they certainly have a right. And what I tell them is you can't be successfully sued for not stopping the killing when you could have. But every morning when you look in a mirror, you're going to see the face of someone who let other people die when they had the power to stop it. And you're going to ask yourself, is that something you really want to live with?
I agree. Well, look, thank you very much for your time and this question. It's really very useful, and it will be part. I will interview a few people. Actually, if you don't mind,